When I sat down to write this book, I didn't expect to spend so much time thinking about people's lives, my own, strangers, and the countless stories that money leaves behind. But that's where the truth lives. Not in spreadsheets or equations, but in what real people actually do when fear, hope, pride, envy, and uncertainty take the wheel. Money is one of the few topics that touches every corner of our lives, yet we rarely talk about it with honesty. So today I want to share with you the core idea of my book, that doing well with money is not about what you know, it's about how you behave. And behavior is the hardest part. Behind every financial decision, good or bad, there's a story, a childhood lesson, a scar, a dream, a moment of fear, a moment of courage. So let me frame our conversation today around 5 questions that shape the heart of this book. First, why do perfectly smart people do irrational things with money? Second, how much of our financial success is truly in our control, and how much is luck? Third, why is never enough one of the most dangerous financial traps we fall into? Fourth, what makes compounding so deceptively powerful that we consistently underestimate it? And fifth, why does money mean different things to different people? And how can understanding this change our relationships, our expectations, and our lives? These are the questions I've wrestled with, not as an expert looking down from above, but as a person trying to make sense of his own behavior and the world around him. So let's dive in. Question 1. Why do perfectly smart people do irrational things with money? I've spent my entire career writing about finance, and yet the moments that taught me the most didn't happen in front of a Bloomberg terminal. They happened while I was parking cars as a valet in Los Angeles. There was a tech executive who would roll through, a man who had made a fortune designing components for Wi-Fi routers. Brilliant, hardworking, and yet his relationship with money was a mix of insecurity and recklessness. He carried bricks of cash in his pocket like trophies. He threw $1,000 gold coins into the Pacific just to watch them skip across the water. He wanted to be seen. He wanted to feel something. And eventually, he lost everything. Then there was Ronald Reed, a janitor who quietly saved, quietly invested, quietly lived his life. No attention, no theatrics, no performance. And when he died, he left millions to his community. That contrast became impossible for me to ignore. These weren't differences in intelligence. They were differences in experiences, fears, identities, and values. None of us learn about money in the same classroom. If you grew up watching your parents panic over bills, that shapes you. If you came of age during a booming stock market, that shapes you. If your economy was defined by war or instability, that shapes you too. So people aren't crazy. They're emotional. They're shaped. They're carrying invisible stories into every financial decision. And the takeaway I've learned is simple. You cannot judge someone's financial choices without understanding their background. And you cannot understand your own behavior until you're willing to examine the emotional experiences that shaped it. What if every emotion you feel is guidance, not judgment? This book says emotions aren't random. They're indicators, absolute indicators of how close or far you are from your inner being. Think about that. Every emotion, from joy to rage to despair, is simply information. Joy means you're in sync. Relief means you're getting there. Frustration means you're stretching too hard against who you really are. Depression means you've stopped listening altogether. But none of it is wrong. It's just feedback, like the dashboard lights of your life. I started experimenting with this idea. When I felt bad, I stopped asking, "What's wrong with me?" and started asking, "What thought did I just believe?" That changed everything. I realized that my feelings weren't against me. They were trying to guide me home. One of my favorite ideas in the book is that you can't get to joy from despair in one jump. It's too big a gap. All you can do is find the next better thought. If you're angry, maybe anger is better than numbness. If you're frustrated, maybe that's movement toward hope. The goal isn't to fake happiness. It's just to relieve resistance. The moment you feel even a little bit better, you're turning your canoe downstream. That's vibrational alignment. That's what healing really is. Not fixing your past, but releasing your fight against it. So the takeaway here? Your emotions are not moral verdicts. They're navigation. Every one of them is guiding you home. Question 3. Why is never enough one of the most dangerous financial traps we fall into? I've met people worth hundreds of millions of dollars who threw everything away because they wanted just a little more. Rajat Gupta, a man who had achieved extraordinary success, far beyond what his upbringing could have predicted, risked his reputation and his freedom for information that would help him make even more. And Bernie Madoff, who was already enormously wealthy from legitimate business ventures, built a fraud that eventually collapsed under the weight of its own insatiability. These weren't people acting out of necessity. They weren't struggling. They weren't desperate. They simply didn't have a sense of enough. And without enough, the goalpost never stops moving. You reach one peak only to realize there's another taller mountain in the distance. The achievement becomes invisible. Satisfaction evaporates. Envy takes over. I've fallen into versions of this trap myself, chasing metrics, status, approval, a sense of accomplishment that always seemed to recede. But there's a quiet moment of clarity that comes when you ask, if I'm not satisfied now, what makes me think I'll be satisfied with more? Enough isn't about limiting ambition. It's about protecting the things you can't replace. Your reputation, your peace, your relationships, your time. The takeaway is simple, but powerful. The ability to say enough is a superpower. It's not about stopping growth. It's about stopping self-destruction. What makes compounding so deceptively powerful that we constantly underestimate it? Let me tell you something that still amazes me. Most of Warren Buffett's wealth came after his 60s, not because his returns were extraordinary, but because he started investing when he was a child and never stopped. If he had started in his 30s and retired in his 60s, you probably wouldn't know his name. His skill is investing, yes, but his secret is time. Compounding is the eighth wonder of the world because it turns small, consistent actions into unimaginable results, but only if you give it enough runway. The problem is that compounding doesn't feel intuitive. We're wired for linear thinking, not exponential thinking. It's hard to emotionally grasp that a small decision today, a saved dollar, a good habit, a patient choice, can snowball into something enormous decades from now. We want outcomes now. We want progress we can see. But compounding happens quietly, slowly, invisibly, until it doesn't. The same way an ice sheet begins with a thin layer of snow that survives one cool summer, wealth begins with a handful of early behaviors that go unnoticed. And then, years later, it suddenly looks obvious. The real lesson I've learned is this. The biggest financial returns come from endurance, not brilliance, from sticking around long enough for the snowball to form. And the takeaway here is one of the foundational truths of everything I write. The most powerful force in finance is patience. Give your efforts time to work. Question 5. Why does money mean different things to different people? And how can understanding this change everything? Money is not about math, or intelligence, or even strategy. Money is about psychology. It's about what we value, what we fear, what we hope for, what we dream of. When I look at the world through that lens, everything makes more sense. The person buying lottery tickets every week might not be acting irrationally. They may be buying hope, something they cannot access any other way. The person saving every penny might not be frugal. They might be seeking security they never had growing up. The person spending lavishly might not be reckless. They might be trying to fill an emotional gap that money temporarily covers. And the person hoarding wealth may not be greedy. They may be terrified of going backwards. When you realize that people's financial decisions reflect their life experiences, not spreadsheets, you stop criticizing and you start understanding. And the same applies to yourself. When you understand why money triggers certain emotions in you, why you worry too much, or compare too much, or spend too quickly, you gain the freedom to change those patterns. Money is one of the last great taboos, but it's also one of the greatest mirrors. The takeaway is this: you don't need to master finance. You need to understand yourself. Financial behavior is personal before it is logical, and that understanding can change your life. So let me close with this. Everything I've shared today is just a glimpse into what I explored in the book. These lessons weren't written from a pedestal. They were written from my own questions, my own mistakes, my own attempts to understand a force that touches every part of our lives. If you choose to explore the full book, my hope is that it gives you something more than financial advice. I hope it gives you perspective, compassion, clarity, permission to be human. Money is a tool, but it's also a teacher. And if we're willing to listen, really listen, it can help us live lives that are calmer, more intentional, and more grounded. Thank you for spending this time with me. Thank you for caring enough about your financial life and your emotional life to reflect on these ideas. And wherever you are in your journey, I hope you leave with this simple sense of encouragement. You are allowed to define what wealth means to you. You're allowed to take your time, and you are allowed to build a life that feels like enough.